Greetings from Winkler, Manitoba, Canada to all the CCI camps around the world. My name is Dale and this is my wife Candace. We have been in full-time ministry at Winkler Bible Camp for 18 years, 15 of those as executive directors. When we began in 2002, our children were 11, 9, and 6 years old. Now we have 4 grandchildren with another one on the way. Well, this is not how any of us imagined our global gathering event would play out. There's no ocean breeze gently warming my face, or koalas slumbering in the trees nearby, or kangaroos hopping across the road. Here in Manitoba, there's still some snow on the ground, and the lakes are covered in ice. So zip up your coats, put on your mitts, and prepare to shiver your way through the next few minutes with us. We believe that what we are about to share with you is valuable, not because we're perfect, but because we are still working in ministry together. The ministry is thriving, we have strong relationships with all of our adult children, and they all value the ministry even after growing up in it.
In the context of what we're talking about today, the phrase sleeping with the enemy would be applied like this. As a married couple, you need to identify where the battle actually is and who you are really fighting. If you don't recognize these 2 key factors, your default settings will make each other the enemy. Everyone loses when this happens. Your marriage, your family, and your ministry. So who is the enemy and why are we sleeping with him? Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." We all know this and understand this, and yet somehow too often we fail to apply this to our marriages. Too often we make the problems or struggles we are having in our ministry about the other person, our spouse. Many times blaming, holding grudges, arguing, thinking you are better, etc. Bit by bit, giving the true enemy, Satan, more space in the bed.
Not always recognizing soon enough who the enemy is has been a source of some of our deepest struggles and hurts. The flip side, recognizing sooner when the enemy has come between the sheets has brought us through some difficult times with some great joy and victory. Ephesians 6:11 says this, "To put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." We've been ordered to fight, and this applies to whether you're in ministry together or not. But if you are working together in ministry, you're foolish to live passively because our true enemy is relentless.
If you want a successful marriage, you don't just hope that it will happen. It takes effort, huge effort. You must fight for it. So why fight? Why use that image? Because fighting gives us a picture of action. Too often we become lazy about the battles that are upon us and around us, and we pray, "Oh God, help," acting and looking defeated. People, Jesus Christ already won the war. All he's asking is for us to do our part, to pick up the sword and shield he's told us to wear, step to the front lines to do battle. In other words, live your faith and marriages on the offensive. Fight for them.
For clarity's sake, we know there are many practices couples need to implement in order to have a healthy marriage. But today our focus is on couples who work in ministry together. We will be sharing with you 6 key ideas that we believe are of vital importance to help you actively fight for this. Number 1, guard and protect your marriage. It's crucial that you are totally exposed to one another more than just in the bedroom. Here are some very easy, practical pieces of armor that you can wear. Share all your accounts and passwords, logins, etc. Set aside daily time to share about what's going on in your area of work. Make sure your private meetings are not going to put you in compromising positions so that you hold them in public spaces or at a third party. And no rides alone with the opposite gender. Some of you may be thinking, that seems a little extreme and sounds like maybe you're a little weak. Well, that's exactly what I used to believe. But now I know that only a truly strong person lives by those guidelines. You see, a weak person thinks they are strong enough to handle the trials and temptations that come their way, but then find themselves unprepared and scrambling to find their artillery once the enemy is upon them. Whereas a strong person understands our human weakness and wears their armor, knowing battles will arise.
Number 2, be consistent. Working together as a couple, living in community, raising a family, working with staff, volunteers, board members, and then dealing with the public all require different hats. But under that hat must always be the same person. So be yourself, because everyone else has taken.
Number 3, share with your team how you function as a couple. Candace and I can be quite expressive and blunt towards each other, and we're both okay with that. As a result, our staff observe all this because we are the same wherever we go. We have learned that sharing how we function and interact as a couple is critical for our team to understand us.
Number 4, both of you must be on your organizational chart. This is crucial. It uncomplicates everything for everyone. Whether you are employed or maybe serving in the ministry as a volunteer, you must be on your organizational chart. Everyone needs to know where everyone fits into the structure of your organization, who they report to, who reports to them, and how much authority they have.
And number 5, define your roles. This may only be applicable to those couples who are co-leading in your ministry, but we have learned that our staff needs clarity. We are both in charge of different aspects of the ministry, and it gets murky when your team does not know who to talk to about what.
And lastly, number 6, value one another's gifts and strengths. Adam and Eve were the first husband and wife team. God put this team together, both uniquely made and made for each other to serve God. And it was very good. We think it is unfortunate that so many people look back on this particular piece of history and only see the bad choices that were made and the repercussions of those choices. They don't spend much time looking at God's original plan. In all aspects of humanity, we can see that the original plan has been messed up. But our hope is that we have also experienced times where we see glimpses of what very good can look like.
Valuing one another's gifts and strengths has been a long, hard journey for us. Knowing your spouse's gifts and strengths that they bring to the ministry and understanding that we are actually stronger together seems easy. It makes sense. Well, because 2 are better than 1. The logic is simple. We are 2 completely different people, so if we line up our combined strengths and work together, they should outdo or overpower our individual weakness. Why is it that so often we tend to feel inadequate, threatened, or sometimes even superior to one another?
In the early part of our ministry, this was a huge struggle for us, constantly second-guessing each other, stepping on the other's toes, or telling the other person how, why, when, where, what they should be doing or should have done. Some of you may not be able to relate, but we're guessing that many of you are going, yep, been there, or possibly thinking, finally, someone understands. I used to believe that anytime Dale had to speak somewhere, give a report or a message, even a devotional, that I needed to be involved. It just wouldn't be very good if I didn't at least go over his material. Just tweak it a bit, add a story, something. Until God revealed to me one day how I was actually standing in the way, even hindering Dale. God wanted to shape and mold Dale how he wanted him to look. He didn't actually need my help. It was the last week of summer camp and I got the flu. Our chapel speaker was suddenly unable to be there for the week, so Dale quickly stepped in. As he was busy preparing, he kept asking me to look over his material and see if it was good enough or what he should add. You see, he had now got to the point where he thought he was incapable, even inadequate, to put something together on his own. Well, I was so incredibly sick, I just didn't care. I told him he'd be fine and to quit asking me. By the 3rd evening of chapel, I felt good enough to at least show my face a little and join chapel from a distance. I'll never forget the overwhelming sense that I experienced. I was not only hearing everything Dale was saying, which was incredible, but I also felt God speaking to me the entire time, saying, "My dear and precious daughter, are you listening? Are you truly listening? Do you hear how I have inspired him? I know that you mean well, thinking you are helping Dale to be better, but back off. It is not your job to shape him into all that he's supposed to be. In fact, if I leave it up to you, you will never go the places that I have already planned for you. So my dear and precious daughter, Let me do my job. I felt so ashamed for behaving as if I was God, or at least acting like I knew better than him. I immediately apologized to God and asked him to help me to back off. That night I explained to Dale what had happened to me and apologized to him as well. And so began my journey of learning to let go and learning to treasure and value Dale's abilities and gifts that God had given him. Have I perfected this? Sadly, no. But I am way quicker to recognize when I'm taking over again, slowly giving the enemy some space between the sheets. Thankfully, we serve a gracious God.
Becoming humble enough in order for me to lead well has been and is still sometimes very difficult. You see, we were hired as the director couple, but I'm the head of the family, but we're one flesh. But I'm mostly in the office, but Candace is very gifted and brings so much to the ministry. But. For me, a huge roadblock in our ministry was that I thought that being the head meant that I was supposed to be all-knowing. And for me, not knowing also meant that I was failing. When my failure was actually not valuing what Candace brought to the ministry. Candace and I usually did the hiring process for full-time positions together. But for some reason, I started to believe that I could do this on my own. I don't need Candace's perceiver abilities. I was confident that I had it covered, so I hired a particular individual. On day one of this individual's employment, Candace shook their hand and they introduced themselves. Moments later, she gets me alone and says, "What are you thinking? Why did you hire this person?" Well, I was ticked and asked her what her problem was. And she told me that she couldn't explain it, but something felt very wrong. We argued and we discussed it, and she agreed to let it go and support my decision. Well, that particular hire was a train wreck, and it lasted a total of 4.5 months. Candace never said "I told you so." You see, it wasn't about her being right, it was about her being valued. Why didn't I value the strengths that God had given her? I too would love to say that I learned from that mistake, but I didn't. It took several more situations, me going it alone, leaving Candace to struggle, to understand why God would call us to the ministry if she was not being appreciated or valued by her own husband. The enemy had actually taken up so much room in our bed that there was hardly enough room for the both of us. Needless to say, the intimacy suffers when the enemy has taken up so much space. Over the years, we have learned to do this much better. We had to do it better, or we wouldn't be in ministry right now. In fact, her strengths,
together with his strengths,
actually make us look like we know what we're doing.
Sleeping with the enemy would be applied like this. As a married couple, you need to identify where the battle actually is and who you are really fighting. If you don't recognize those two key factors, your default settings will make each other the enemy. Everyone loses when this happens. Your marriage, your family, and your ministry. Remember, the enemy is against kingdom work. Therefore, he is against a healthy marriage that is working together to further God's kingdom. So be on the offensive with your armor on, your tactical maneuvers in place, knowing who the fight is really against.